As was said the other day, before we can close off this link that has been the series of stories that have been said to be like threads that contain the characters and symbols and archetypes of our psyche, our being, with the possibility that we can weave them into something that will allow us to acknowledge, accept, and experience our wholeness, our enlightenment. There are several questions that have to be answered. The first question that came up in the story told on Sunday, which was Divine Mother's story, when she said three things that very often came up, and that they were, "You will go beyond me." There are only three graces: to be born as a human being, to be seeking liberation, and to be in the presence of an enlightened being. And the third was, the age of the gurus is at an end. So the question that arose out of those three sayings is, what then is enlightenment? If wholeness does not beget for us being the master, the teacher, or the guru, what does it really mean to be whole, to be enlightened? So this is the first question that arises. But the second was alluded to in the story on Tuesday. And it again arises out of a Divine Mother saying, because she has said, and she has stated many times, and as we know from her story, she was given the power of Ramakrishna, the great universal saint, to complete his work with the householders. But she would say again and again, when I die, the power will go back to the source. So that leads us into our second question. And there's that story. There's a story about a very, very rich merchant by the name of Abdul Malik. Now he was known far and wide as being a generous man, the most generous man in the place which he lived, which was called Khorasan. Now his known generosity went far and wide, far beyond the boundaries of his place of abode. But Abdul Malik came to the realization that he gained pleasure and kudos and recognition because of this generosity, and this generosity was only skimming off the surface of his wealth. So he decided that the only thing he could do was to give it all up, all of it, all of his wealth, all of his belongings, and leave himself to destiny or fate or the divine, or Allah, as was the name in those days. And this is what he did. He gave it all away. But then, not long after, when he was sitting in his sitting room, in his meditation, which he did every day, as he was meditating, an apparition arose out of the carpet in front of him in the form of a dervish with a patchwork robe. And this apparition said to him, I am your real self. And because of your surrender of all, I am able to manifest to you and to tell you and to give you. And this apparition handed to Abdul Malik a stick. And he said to Abdul Malik, beat me with this stick and I will turn to gold. And have no fear that this gold will be finite, because like all things, it arises from the source. So this is what Abdul Malik did. Every day thereafter, he beat the apparition that arose with the stick that he had been given, and it turned into gold that he was able to disseminate to all those who were in need. But then one day he happened to have an acquaintance with him when this apparition appeared out of the carpet. And when this visitor saw what had happened, he immediately made his own assumptions and thought that all dervishes have the power to turn into gold. So he invited all the dervishes that he could find to a great feast. And when they were all gathered together and had feasted, he took out a big iron bar and he went around and beat them, expecting them all to turn into gold. So there were a lot of bloodied and battered dervishes around, but those who were left unbattered grabbed Abdul Malik and took him off to the authorities. And of course, he had to then call on Abdul Malik to give testimony for him. But on his way to the court, where he was to give that testimony, of course his real self came to him and told him what he had to say. And perhaps we can glean that and leave that unsaid, what Abdul Malik said to the magistrate. But as it turned out, the visitor was hauled off to the insane asylum until he came back to his senses. And Abdul Malik could continue for the rest of his days to beat on his real self with the stick that he had been given to elicit gold which could be shared to all in need. So, of course, you can glean what that second question is. Or maybe there's two questions. What is this source from which all things arise? And that's a big question. But in our weaving, as we've listened to these stories that contain the kings, the fairies, the princesses, the ghouls, the demons, the genies, the lamps, we can ask ourselves, what does this stick represent for us? And what kind of a bridge is it for us between that world of the fairy tales, the occult, all these stories that have been told that are part of our psyche, because we know that all of them are here. The demons, the ghouls, the fairies, the princesses, the kings, the feathers, all of it is a part of us. Every story is our story. So when we bring them together, and this huge question, What is this source which boggles our mind? When we have and put together this weaving that brings us to wholeness, acknowledging, accepting, and experiencing all these levels, and we have this tool represented in every story, the amulets, the staff of the Zen master, and so on. We can find it. So we can find it in ourselves. When we answer these questions, we can close off this link in our chain, acknowledging, accepting, and experiencing our wholeness, our enlightenment. And from that naturally arises who and what we are and what we do without labels. Master, teacher, guru.